Hey guys, Ron here, and it's time to finally review both DLCs of Pokemon Sword and Shield. I knew that my perspective on the Isle of Armor would change after grasping the entire context of the full DLC, so I waited until I played the Crown Tundra to fully express my feelings. Keep in mind that this won't be a critical analysis of every aspect of this downloadable content, but rather my impressions while playing them. Just my honest experience with these games. It's always important to know that I did enjoy Sword and Shield a lot. I thought it excelled in the core aspects of Pokemon and was a natural next step based on Game Freak's track record. While inconsistent in quality and execution, it was a lot of fun, according to my playstyle. However, after covering all the criticisms of these games in various videos, I do understand all their flaws, but I base my opinions of games on the things I enjoyed instead of what I didn't. So, to me, Sword and Shield rank right in the middle among all main series Pokemon games. But did the DLC raise the score, or did they put into perspective how much better Sword and Shield could have been? Let's find out. When you first enter the Isle of Armor, you're greeted by Avery or Clara, who have the same arc and shifty personality, but damn is it way more appealing to be sabotaged by a rival who is also a cute diva. So Clara in general is definitely a more interesting and dynamic rival than most. It did feel like her development was a bit rushed at the end, but I enjoyed every time she was on screen. I do wish the battles with Clara and Avery were tougher though. They did not feel like post-game content. I do like Clara's battle theme more than Avery's, but Avery's encounter theme is so melodic, I love it. The beaches of this isle were an amazing first impression considering we didn't have any warm beaches in Galar. It was an immediate step up from both the roots and wild areas of the mainland. I appreciate that we had access to the entire Isle of Armor right from the beginning and could explore this unique landscape. But the most emotional part was finally seeing old Pokemon back on the Switch. It made every encounter fresh, and to a person like me who never transfers Pokemon from other gens, seeing these Pokemon in the overworld was like seeing old friends again. Mustard and Honey were great characters too. Even though he was going easy, it would have been more satisfying if Mustard's first battle wasn't with two pre-evolved Pokemon. I personally like how the levels were scaled to whichever gym badge you had, but if this DLC had a focus on battle, it would have made sense to give the champion more of a challenge. They never even acknowledged the fact that I was champion. I get that it's a remote island, but even Hop doesn't mention it when he appears. The well-executed final battle with Mustard was the only thing that felt like it would be in a postgame. Once the story was in full swing, catching the Slowpokes was a neat little gimmick. It was entertaining, but relatively easy. But it is in the soothing wetlands where the wild area's improvements really kicked in. The textures, set dressing, and assets are more detailed. These places look lively and natural, not empty and outdated like the wild area. From then on, any place I explored in the wild area felt like an improvement from anything we got in the main game. Regardless of whether or not it was at the level some of you may have expected, to me it was still very clear that the Isle of Armor showcased better environmental design than mainland Galar. Unlike the relatively linear Galarian routes, places like the Forest of Focus had me completely lost for a bit. Each area is interconnected seamlessly, and the biomes are naturally separated. Even the minimal pop-button desert was naturally isolated, unlike the Dusty Bowl. What I unexpectedly loved was the water. It made the isle feel vast. You never know if there is a tiny little island or crevice that you missed. Archipelagos like these are the reason I love Hoenn. That's why I love the Sharpedo in the water. It's a minor addition that makes traveling through the ocean more exciting, immersive, and engaging. And last but not least, the caves were unlike any in Galar, because they actually had split paths and various entrances. They were a sight for sore eyes, and although not quite there, they were finally getting closer to feeling like the caves from previous regions. Overall, I really enjoyed the landscape of the Isle of Armor. It's pretty and fairly unique. At the same time, it felt like the future of Pokemon because we never had 16 different areas that were seamlessly combined into one island. It was an actual open world, not just an open field. But after more consideration in comparison with the Crown Tundra, I do think it would have been better if each area felt a little more separate, so they didn't feel all condensed into one small island. And I still wish there were way more NPC battles, considering this DLC had a focus on training, and plenty of dojo members that we could have sparred with. The Diglett side quest was actually welcomed. It gave me another explicable reason to explore the areas, and I thought Alolan Pokemon were a fantastic incentive, especially since you would get the rewards in increments instead of just one unsatisfying reward at the end. Kubfu's quest was too easy and superficial, but the positive side was that it did help me bond with the super expressive Pokemon and it naturally reintroduced falling Pokemon. I thought it was actually entertaining seeing which Pokemon would keep up with you even on water and which would walk too slowly, but on the other hand, it made it less satisfying to see my favorite Mons not keep up at all. Of course, the solution would be to make falling Pokemon walk at the same pace as the trainers like in Let's Go, but the camera of Let's Go was above you, just like in handheld Pokemon games. It's not as simple now that the camera is behind you and even controllable. Whenever Whenever I do have a big Pokemon who keeps up with me, like Beware, the Pokemon actually blocks my view, though I'm sure that with time and effort they can come up with a solution, so step it up, Game Freak. But at the end of the day, I did have a tiny bit of fun walking with and mostly naturally leveling up my Cupfu to level 65 while completing my Pokedex, cause it would not be rewarding to use Candy. The Tower of Water was cool, but ultimately no challenge at all, except for Mustard's Cupfu. I actually lost multiple times until I came up with an item-related strategy. I'm sure it's not tough with a level 70 Cupfu, but I always make sure to create just enough challenges to have fun. But I understand that it's not ideal for the developers to require the player to limit themselves. But I do like Urshifu, so its evolution felt earned. I actually like Hop, so I was happy to see him back, but the search for Honey was a bit tedious and patronizing. I did find the G-Max Vespiquen to be challenging though. Restricted sparring was a cool addition since I love facilities with a neat twist, but this one was a bit too hard, and the reward was kinda lame. I think the Isle of Armor was a great way to get us acquainted with the idea of DLC, and ready for the main course, which I believe to be the Crown Tundra. A lot of the features like the new G-Max starters, Max Soup, bike customization, items, Pokemon, and moves didn't feel like post-game content, but rather features that normally would have been in the actual game itself. The Isle of Armor as a whole felt like Sword and Shield, but with a lot of its features fully realized. You may not like it if you didn't like Sword and Shield, cause it felt like more of the same, but with a better environment and some neat characters, while the Crown Tundra felt like it was giving us a glimpse into Generation 9. The Crown Tundra opens up with a reasonable introduction to Peony and his daughter. He's kinda like an adult Barry, with some great dialogue and interactions with literally any character he meets. It was also a pleasant surprise that Peony has a team of fully evolved level 70 steel types. It's not too challenging, but immediately indicates that this is meant to be post-game content, and I like that. We're introduced to Dynamax adventures, and I gotta admit that as a fan of the Battle Factory, rental Pokemon are my jam. It makes it so we can't just use an overleveled Pokemon and allows the other NPCs to have Mons with useful moves to back me up. The strategy of choosing which type to aim for on top of the time limit adds pressure and is way more engaging than max raids. Not to mention getting rid of the shields makes these battles less tedious and frustrating. It was a great way to get rewarded with strong and legendary Pokemon. Once I made my way into the actual town, I was immediately hooked on the fact that this was the first settlement in Pokemon without a fixed camera. It really feels like we're in a transitional point in this franchise where Game Freak is testing out things for the future, and this one is successful. The music is grand, and the villagers are integrated into the story quite well, and make a better impression than the citizens of most Galarian towns. I wish there were multiple towns in this DLC, honestly. At this point I noticed how big the map was. It's more spread out and half of it isn't just ocean. The biomes are not as diverse as the Isle of Armor, but definitely more cohesive and interesting. There isn't just snow, it was all the environments that a tundra has to offer, but most importantly, the layout, in my opinion, made it more enjoyable to explore. Instead of every location leading into each other on one island, each location here branches off into other locations. They feel like routes, cause each location feels relatively separate instead of intertwined with other locations. It's this combination of wild area and route design that makes the Crown Tundra feel like the roots of a Generation 9 region. And the caves, guys, they're finally mazes again. That's a big deal. Add some trainers and HM puzzles to the Crown Tundra, and it would be what the future Pokemon game would look like. And the music is definitely my favorite of all 4 wild areas. It is confusing to navigate at times, especially if fog is in play, but you can spend like 10 seconds changing the time and date so the weather is more to your liking, but the lack of direction is what has been missing from Generation 8. They really need to give us a functional map in the next game though. The one in Sword and Shield is useless. There are less new Pokemon to encounter in the overworld, but that's supplemented by the legendaries and Dynamax adventures. I love the non-linearity of the quest as well. I did, however, start with Calyrex's Crusade. I was a fan of its design before, and his amazingly executed story and personality made me fall in love with this Pokemon in a matter of hours. This is how you handle a Pokemon-based story. It's not perfect at all, but I like how Calyrex likes you for your compassionate actions, not because you're the chosen one or anything, and it feels like something a champion would do, unlike anything in the Isle of Armor. The dialogue with Calyrex and Peony is entertaining, the quest takes us to marvelous locations, and I think the Snowslide Slope is one of my favorite places in all of Pokemon. I love the Pokemon there, how it branches off into a tunnel with beautiful views of the landscape and Regice's temple. It was hell trying to catch a Beldum, but was worth it for a Metagross to follow me. Calyrex's dance was extraordinary, both steeds look fantastic, and the Crown Shrine is straight out of Breath of the Wild. I do wish it was more significant though. I kept Calyrex on my team after gaining so much respect for this royal Pokemon. As I was adventuring, I chanced upon the Regi Temples. It felt like an actual adventure. I do wish the puzzles weren't as easy as they were, although I'm sure most of us didn't immediately think to whistle in front of Registeel's ruins. Getting to hear another remix of the Regi battle theme was a treat. It's definitely a great alternative that sounds even more appropriate. I am still in awe that we have new Regis. It's been a childhood dream of mine. I love Regieleki's design and animation, and respect the lore behind Regidrago. I was ecstatic to see Sonia again, and it was heartwarming to have someone in the DLC acknowledge the fact that I was champion. Thank you, Sonia, you're the best! Her surprising mission to track down the Swords of Justice was actually more engaging than the Diglett hunt, and technically more rewarding. It's less tedious to find tiny footprints that are all in order and make sense in the world of Pokemon, and even real life. It helped build the lore and gave me another reason to explore the Frigid Sea, another location that may be one of my favorite places in the franchise. Stuff like this is technically more interesting than the post-game legendary hunts we had in amazing games like Pokemon Black and White 2, but I am a bit salty we didn't get a remix of the Unova legendary battle theme. That would have been so sweet. Thank God we got that amazing legendary bird battle theme. It's definitely my favorite track in any DLC and immediately in my top 10 for Sword and Shield. I loved literally everything about the Legendary Birds quest. Their designs, their action-packed cutscene, the fact that we have to chase them through various environments, and each bird having a unique chase reflecting their character. I do wish there was a cool story-related resolution with the tree and legendary birds, but I didn't really expect one. At the end of the day, Balmir Lake and its giant tree was another location in this DLC that has become one of my favorite locations in all of Pokemon. Once I finished with the legendary quests, the Galarian Star Tournament was a feature I knew I'd love. I'm a huge fan of the cast of Generation 8, and getting more player and trainer interaction was ideal. I finally got some more post-game battles with characters I cared about. The strategies that some of these gym leaders were employing, like Raihan's Flygon using Earthquake while Piers' Obstacle used Obstruct, was very impressive. The levels and move pools were perfect too. I do wish the player could only use 3 Pokemon like the rest of the challengers, but I could self-impose the rule. It just seems like Galar now has multiple battle facilities unlike any region without a battle frontier. We have the Battle Tower, Restricted Sparring, Champion Cup to rematch gym leaders, Galarian Star Tournament, Max Raids, and Max Adventures, and other rematches too. At the end of the day, it felt like to me the DLC was worth the money, considering it added more than what a third playthrough would, but with half the price of a full Switch game. And now if I ever wanted to restart the game with a different account, I would still have all these included. Not to mention that in my head, it seems about right to say that the Isle of Armor was worth $10 and the Crown Tundra was worth $20. I've played 25 hours of the DLCs combined so far, so that's kind of the amount of time it took me to play through the full plot of Sword and Shield. I understand that these DLCs may not be worth it if you wanted a plot that continued from the main game, had way higher expectations, don't like DLC in general, still disagree with the price, or didn't like Sword and Shield at all. I know there are going to be those who hate the DLCs because they simply don't fix all the problems ingrained into Sword and Shield. I don't think it's fair to judge them for still being part of these controversial games. It's a catch-22, since if these DLCs are good, people will have the perspective that these great DLC features could have been in the main game. Therefore, Sword and Shield are even more frustrating to them. I'm just happy that there's finally indication that Game Freak is showing growth, although I understand that a cynic would say the opposite. To me, the DLCs are easily the best parts of the game, and not because they're entirely different, but because they iterate and expand upon all the cool ideas in Sword and Shield that were half-baked or unpolished. I hope this was all a test for the next game. The Crown Tundra and even the Isle of Armor were my ideal way of interacting with Pokemon and becoming closer with the creatures that drew me into the franchise in the first place. The little things like chancing upon a Regi Temple, discovering Remote Sea where the feels clap for me, being chased by Nidorans, seeing a Tyrantrum in the wild, and viewing the sunset with my beloved Pokemon were only possible in these games. And as a lifelong Pokemon fan, I'm not going to pretend that these weren't the coolest experience I've had with this franchise. This video was never meant to persuade anybody because the point is always that everybody plays Pokemon differently, but if it makes you happy to know that I love the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra, then I hope you enjoyed this review. And make sure to leave a like, subscribe to see more, and check the description for the t-shirts I made for you guys and my Patreon to get cool rewards like seeing my videos days early, or click the join button for even more rewards like discounts on merch. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys very soon. Bye!